Love that red on you, Miss Yvette.
Oh, thank you. Welcome to folks who are joining us. We are right at 11:30, so we'll give it a couple of minutes before we get started. Good morning, Monica Williams, and good morning, Virginia. Thanks for joining us and joining us in the chat.
That's your little coworker back there.
Do you hear him? I can't tell.
I love it.
Okay.
He just brightens up the whole mood here.
Learning words. And I see a handful of more folks who have joined us over the last couple of minutes. We will get started in about 1 to 2 minutes. We're just letting folks join us on Facebook Live and Zoom. Quick shout out to Javier and Scott, who've also said good morning to everybody. Good morning to you as well. All right, we will go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for spending an hour of your time with us. Good morning, Claudia. My name is Yvette Ruiz, and I am one of 2 co-chairs for the Hispanic Impact Fund. Our second co-chair, Sergio Rodriguez, isn't able to join us right at this second, but on behalf of both of us, I'm thrilled to be able to join you all in our Meet the Grantees session today with the Austin Community Foundation, the Hispanic Impact Fund. As I mentioned, my name is Yvette Ruiz. I actually work with JP Morgan Chase as our foundation officer, but have been a co-founder since the beginning of the HIF, and then obviously co-chair now. So thank you again. We wouldn't be able to do any of this work without our first-time, long-time investors, our corporate partners, friends of the HIF. Thank you so much for entrusting your precious dollars with us to be able to make these really meaningful grants out to the community. I also want to very quickly thank a couple of folks who are on the call that you'll get to hear from today. Monica Andre, who is our outgoing 2020 grants chair. I'll introduce her a little bit more thoroughly in a second. Also want to thank Stephanie Bazan, who is our incoming grants chair, and a huge shout out to Linda Medina, who is our 2021 Somos chair. So if you receive a call from Esteban Delgado or Linda Medina, be sure to pick it up because they've got great important questions to ask you. So with that, I just wanted to say thank you. My son in the background also wants to say thank you in the best way that he knows how. And I will pass it over to Monica. As I mentioned earlier, Monica is the outgoing grants chair for the Hispanic Impact Fund and really did a lion's share of the work in organizing our committee, our reviewing committee, to be able to review all of the grants applications that we've received and played an integral part in the selection process for the folks that you'll get to meet and hear from later on this afternoon. She is also a rock star at UFCU. So without further ado, just wanted to say thank you again. And here's Monica.
Thank you, Yvette. What a great intro. You make me feel so good. I'm a rock star. It's so great to be here with you all this morning. Some good came out of 2020 despite of the challenges, and we want to welcome you to our first webinar of the new year to tell you all about those great things. Today's Meet the Grantees event really seeks to celebrate those organizations that provide the Latino experience in Central Texas, organizations that recognize the need to close the racial divide so that everyone can achieve economic stability and prosperity. The Hispanic Impact Fund, as Yvette described, is the signature program of the Austin Community Foundation. We are a collective of individuals, families, and corporate philanthropists dedicated to closing those opportunity gaps present in our community today. We do this by funding Latinos serving nonprofits working to expand access in 3 key areas: early childhood education, health and wellness services, and job skills and entrepreneurial programming. This year, our mission has been magnified by the multifaceted and far-reaching impacts of COVID-19 and the associated economic downturn. Across our nation, Latinos have been paving the way for our nation's recovery. Many Latinos work the low-wage jobs in public designated sectors, and as essential workers, they have kept the economy going while also putting their health and their safety at odds with their economic security. Unfortunately, the systematic inequities are all too real for our Latino friends, our family, and our neighbors as we reflect on a year in which this pandemic has really ravaged our community. Just to give you a couple of statistics, Latinos make up 35% of the Central Texas population, and yet account for roughly 50% of the deaths and hospitalizations from COVID-19 based on these inequities. That's over 30,000 Latinos in Travis County affected since March of last year, and an average of 263 Hispanic Central Texans are currently hospitalized each week. Families whose whole lives will be put on hold as they hope to recover. Families that don't know if they will be able to weather the storm physically, mentally, emotionally, and financially. And 36,000 of our Latino neighbors across the state who have ultimately lost this tragic battle. We'd like to take a moment to ensure that their fight is remembered and respected. Thank you, everyone. But there is hope, and that's why we're here today. Today, we are joined by our 4 amazing nonprofit leaders whose organizations have and continue to lead the way for Latinos. From their innovative programming that spurred their inception to the pivots that they made to meet the evolving needs of their clients over the years and through the pandemic, to their dreams for the future of our region, we are excited to learn from them and their respective journeys during the panel today. 8 other nonprofits joined these 4 to represent the 12 2020 Hispanic Impact Fund grant partners selected this past December during our largest grant cycle to date. Supporting the nonprofits that serve Hispanic families and individuals in our community is vital to ensuring that the racial wealth divide facing Latinos doesn't widen further in this crisis. And in total, our collective was able to award $225,000 so that these 12 amazing organizations can continue their unwavering commitment. The resources we allocate now must align with our vision for the future, a fairer, more equitable Central Texas where everyone can thrive. Our response will only be effective if it includes the places and the people left out by our current systems. To get this right, everything we do now must also take into the account the economic, social, and health issues our communities were and continue to face pre and post pandemic. In combating racial injustice, which has been spearheaded by our friends, our neighbors, and our family members across our Black and Latinx communities, the Hispanic Impact Fund was humbled to revisit our grant-making process this year to ensure that our 2020 grant cycle move toward that more equitable vision of our work in Central Texas. We had to walk the walk and talk the talk. This meant continuing our practice of unrestricted grant funds, taking into account an organization's commitment to Latinx inclusion and belonging at the staff. Excuse me. we had to take into account these organizations' commitment to Latin inclusion and belonging at the staff level, at the executive leadership level, and at the board level, which is so critical, as well as funding all 12 organizations who made it to the final round in commitments. And now a little bit of background on the Hispanic Impact Fund Grants Committee. In case you want to join this dynamite team, 21, Stephanie, I'm helping you out here. The committee was comprised of 42 individuals, 95% of who identified as Latino, both from our investorship and the community at large. The committee and foundation staff reviewed 81 applications that were submitted to the fund before meeting with 18 semifinalist nonprofits through Zoom to learn more about their great work and the dedication they had to Latino issues and causes. The 12 funded organizations represent a fraction of the amazing work led by Latino serving and largely Latino-led nonprofits across Central Texas. Please join us in recognizing our 12 nonprofit partners for 2020. We are so proud to support their efforts to meet the evolving and urgent needs of our community during this critical time. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Stephanie Bazan. Stephanie is a director of communications at the Greater Austin Hispanic Chamber of Commerce and is the incoming grants chair for the Hispanic Impact Fund. Stephanie will moderate our conversation today, so you're in for a treat. Be sure to leave your questions in that chat to help round out today's conversation. Thank you so much, Stephanie.
Thank you, Monica. Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here today, and I appreciate that warm introduction. I had the honor of working with Monica very closely this last year as the chair-elect of the Grants Committee, and I'm so excited and look forward to taking over the reins as the Grants Committee chair this coming year as we continue to learn and listen to what our community needs and innovate alongside our great partners. And so as we move to our main event today, it is my great pleasure to introduce 4 of our grantees, these community experts who will be joining us for our discussion today. I'm going to start by introducing Marcia Hernandez. She's the founder and executive director of VELA. After witnessing the same gaps in service in the disability community during her 8 years as a speech pathologist, Marcia started VELA in 2011 to partner with parents of children with disabilities to create a brighter future, brighter outcomes. Through dynamic hands-on courses and support, VELA provides knowledge, empowerment, resilience, and community so that all families can thrive. Please help me in welcoming Marcia. I will also introduce Marcia del Rios. She's a dedicated nonprofit professional with 2 decades of experience across varying fields, including education and law. She now serves as Deputy Director of Partners in Parenting, a local organization dedicated to creating a village for supporting Austin families. Originally from Newark, New Jersey, she and her family have now called Austin home for over 8 years. Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Johanna Fábregas. She received her doctorate in history at Indiana University, Bloomington. The role of executive director at Con Mi Madre brings together her background and personal mission of empowering Latina students and their families by breaking down barriers to success. An immigrant herself, Dr. Fábregas came to the US at the age of 14 after living in 4 Latin American countries, and her parents became the biggest advocates for her and her advanced education. She personally identifies with Con Mi Madre's mission because she has lived it. Next, I'd like to introduce Carl Settles. He's the visionary founder and executive director of E4 Youth, a 501c3 nonprofit organization right here in Austin. E4 Youth partners with local schools to provide innovative curriculum and support, career exposure, job shadowing, and internship opportunities to youth ages 16 to 22. These are our wonderful panelists, everybody. So please join me in giving them a round of applause, shout outs on the chat. We are so excited to have them. Thank you for joining us today. All right, so there's a lot to get to, so we're just gonna go ahead and get started and dive right into questions. Marcia, I would love to begin with you. As the founder of VELA, what were some of the things that sparked the beginnings of your organization?
Thank you so much, Stephanie, and we're so thrilled to be here. I really appreciate this opportunity and the Hispanic Impact Fund for believing in so many of us. So VELA will be 10 years old this year. And sometimes it feels like we've always been here. And sometimes it feels like we're just getting started because of how much we want to do. And the initial sparks, pun intended, occurred, as you mentioned, in my years as a speech and language pathologist. So I was working with, as a Latina myself, I'm originally from Colombia, working with Latino immigrant community here in Austin, mixed status families, all that had children with disabilities. And every 2 years or so, I would switch settings. So hospitals, schools, clinics, and eventually home health. But in every single setting, the same thing happened. We focused on the child with the disability and left the parent in the waiting room, looking through an old magazine, alone, confused, and totally overwhelmed. Once I started working in home health and I was in people's homes, there was no waiting room. So parents started asking questions, and across the board, across diagnoses, across zip codes, it was always the same 4 questions. So what does this diagnosis mean? How do I get what my child needs? What are the resources and how on earth do I access them? And then finally, am I the only one? And these questions came from parents that have 15-year-olds asking me if their daughter would walk, from a parent of a 2-year-old with Down syndrome asking me to read paperwork about an upcoming heart surgery, to parents of 10-year-olds asking me, how do we talk to our child about disability? These questions were being asked of me, a speech therapist that just happened to be sitting on their apartment floor, helping their child learn to communicate. But the answers were not in that space, right? Maybe, potentially, if you could Google, but even then, that support came with so many assumptions, so many barriers, and complete isolation, right? So I kept seeing the same gaps across the board, a lack of activating power in families through knowledge, tools, and resources and community so that they could build the best life for their family. So after what I call my quarter life crisis, I started VELA while still working as a speech therapist to create space for learning and support where families could take the next steps from the beginning, not after hitting walls, and to get to do that alongside other families and be taught by a parent that's also walking that similar road for both English and Spanish speakers, but separately because what we were teaching couldn't be translated, right? And so as the only group in town working with families that have children with disabilities en español and en serio en español, it allows us to acknowledge disability stigma, cultural influences, systemic barriers. And through the courses, we teach parents how to understand diagnosis, how to get organized, how to ask the right questions, how to know their rights in both health and education, and then also how to learn how to take care of themselves through mindfulness-based and self-compassion, evidence-based strategies, because the words most often used by the parents in our pre-tests are anxious, depressed, alone, and overwhelmed. So I think the beauty about listening to the sparks, right? And we all are listening and responding to sparks. This is such a reflection of that. I'm filled with puns today, everybody. Is that for sure I founded the organization, but the program design came from families, right? It came from community. It came from starting off with a needs assessment of families of kids with disabilities in the community, to launching our first workshop at Terrazas Library with 20 moms and 10 kids in childcare. We were so loud, to now offering 5 courses weekly, workshops, case management, support groups, Días de Familia, serving over 1,800 families a year, in person, on campuses, and now virtually, of course. Because we truly believed like everything we design has to come from community, because parents are the experts and the spark is theirs, right? We were just getting to shine a light on it.
Thank you so much for that. And I've had the pleasure of hearing the story of how VELA started, and I've also gotten to hear some of the more personal stories about the families. So I would love for you to share just a story about one of the families that demonstrates the power of understanding what all of this medical stuff means, and just, you know, how that helps the families learn to advocate for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when it comes to advocating for a loved one in a medical setting, we can all tap into that vulnerability, right? For either ourselves as the patient, as a daughter, as a parent, as a tío or tía. We've all been in that uncertain moment of helplessness and confusion. For the families that we get to partner with, the cards are stacked against them with more barriers: language, access, transportation, racism. So not understanding medical information, especially when it comes to getting a long-term diagnosis for your child, is paralyzing. Understanding and seeing and knowing what to do next is liberating and powerful, and the ripple effect outlives us, right? And so there's so many stories, but I'll share one that comes to mind recently because I ran into her. So Camila came to VELA 1 year ago almost, and she arrived when we were still doing in-person programming on the bus with her son Francisco, who's 4 at the time. He had just been diagnosed with autism and epilepsy. And I remember they just barreled through the hallway, and he ran directly into our childcare space and hid under the table. It was his first time being away from his mom. And she walked into our classroom space with a grocery bag filled with paperwork, right? Flyers, evals, reports, letters. They were starting our 5-week autism course. And I just remember the look on her face. She was a deer in the headlights. The first page of the most recent evaluation had 17 acronyms on it, in English, of course, filled with super confusing vocabulary. At the end of the report, there was a signature line for her to sign, to say yes or no to this, whatever this was, right? So through our interactive course, Camila started to ground and land. She started to understand her son and know how to talk about him to others so that they could see strengths and not deficits, right? She practiced what questions to ask and how to ask them to the neurologist through assertive communication role plays that we do, because Francisco had been given the wrong dose of medication and she kept being told to wait. But she knew something was wrong. He wasn't sleeping. He was no longer communicating, and she wanted a change. So she secured better interpreters, information in Spanish. Finally, during her follow-up visits, she was able to enroll him in school and attend her first meeting as the lead and not the participant. She secured new Medicaid so that she could start getting his therapies. And I remember hearing her exclaim one day really loudly, "Somos muchos," right? There are many of us. Before VELA, she had never been in a room with more than one doctor, one social worker, one teacher. She thought her family was the only one. She graduated from 2 of our courses. She signed up to start another one with us next week. Francisco's doing awesome in 1st grade, and his seizures are under control. Her advocacy skills now have flowed into ensuring that even virtually he's included, right? Because so often, because of a diagnosis, we make assumptions and exclude. So he's getting a lot of time with his peers. All of the elements of this story are actions that when we think of our Latino families, especially if they're undocumented, they've been told directly or indirectly to not do, right? But slowly, Camila, with knowledge, resources, and tools, she started to take up more space. She started to ask for more, and she got it. And I think the thing when we think about health and wellness and we think about health equity is we think of it as the silo sometimes, but the truth is, to me, Camila is such a good example that understanding her son's diagnosis, how to create access, allowed for access at school. It allowed for economic growth for her family because she could get a job again, right? And it improved her mental health and wellness because she was no longer having panic attacks, now getting to be in a space that supported her wellness as well. So it's at the center of so much. And I think you'll hopefully notice that I said everything that Camila did. I didn't say VELA did, right? Sure, we created the space. We taught the interactive course with the strategies that supported her, and we provided all the wraparound services that she needed. But what matters and what lasts is how that knowledge landed in her, right? And what she took with her. So it's hers to keep forever, to implement for her life. And I think that's what at VELA we're proudest of, is that it's hers, it's not ours. And that's what will create the lasting change.
That's great. And one of the things that I especially heard was that her voice, like she felt more powerful and that she could use her voice in more spaces. And so that is a perfect story to kind of pull in all of those pieces. I do want to ask you one quick question that came in through the chat, and it's, how old are the kiddos who you typically serve? And then are there ever older teens who have maybe not been served before?
Absolutely. Yeah. So our focus is any disability. So it means that we serve families that have children anywhere from 3 months up to 18. And we do have families that will arrive at VELA for the first time with a 15-year-old, a 16-year-old, a 17-year-old, and they didn't tap into any of the resources, any of the agencies or supports that were for them. And so then we have to do this scrambling, right, to try and put these services in place. So one of the things I think for us is our goal, especially with our next 10 years, is moving away from repairing and moving into building, moving into embedding into systems, so that we stop getting the situation of a parent of a 15-year-old desperately looking backwards and saying, I had no idea, nobody told me, or maybe they told me and I didn't understand. And so any family, any disability, any zip code, we're here. And our goal is that we really are at the beginning of the journey, but that when you come into at any point in your lifeline, that we still get to be what you need at that time.
Awesome, thank you. Well, while we're on this subject about the power of knowledge, I want to bring in Marcia and ask her a question. Early childhood education doesn't just start when a child enters the classroom. We know that it's family and surrounding things. It starts at home from day one. Can you tell us a little bit more about your organization and how you champion parents and their new families through this community of empowerment and gaining this knowledge to help them?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you to the Hispanic Impact Fund. We are so grateful to be represented amongst this group of amazing panelists and awardees just generally, and to be welcomed into the fold of the Hispanic Impact Fund this year. And yes, what you mentioned is absolutely true. We know from the research that brain development begins in the very, very early stages, from birth and even before, right? And brain development for those young children has a direct correlation with those relationships that children form early in their lives. And so that relationship between caregiver and child is pivotal in creating these moments where, you see these neural connections being made, right? The science of it is really fascinating. But we also know that parents who are confident, who are connected, who feel supported, are much more likely to engage in those relationships that create those neural connections, right? So if a parent is stressed, and if a parent doesn't feel supported, they're less likely to engage with their child. And so the mission of parents and partners in parenting, rather, is to connect parents with other parents so that they can build that village of support. And so what we do is we bring them together in support groups. We are not a parenting class, but we bring parents together in support groups during those early months when they have their baby 0 to 12 months old with peers. For the Latino community specifically, we have our curriculum fully translated. All of our facilitators are bilingual and all of our facilitators are trained. A good number of our facilitators have actually been through our program, which runs about 8 weeks long. And they have experienced PIP as a parent and they've experienced PIP now as a facilitator, and they bring that to other parents. And right now, I think, especially when we are in this period of a global pandemic, where we are forced by our circumstances to isolate, it's so pivotal to bring these families together, because parenting in those early months can be isolating, can be frustrating, can be stressful, can be beautiful, can be all those things, right? But it's, as Maria mentioned, when you're feeling confident in your ability, you're better able to kind of put yourself forward for yourself and for your child. And so one of the beautiful things about PIP is that parents are validated in their experience when they see what I'm going through is akin to what this other parent is going through. Some of the challenges I'm experiencing are not solely my own. They are familiar, and I can work through these. And so I think the benefit of our program is bringing parents together with their peers to experience that support, to experience that relationship, but then also to have really tangible activities to do with their children. And so one of the components of our groups is a developmental moment where parents practice serve and return skills with their babies. And so we're not teaching them anything earth-shattering, right? I mean, these moments are: observe your baby, look at your child. How is she responding? What do you see? And how do you react to that? Talk to your baby, tell them what you're experiencing during the day, play peekaboo, sing a song. All of these things are things that parents often inherently do, but maybe without understanding what the really important consequences of those actions are, right? So by sharing the brain science with them, they're validated in their experience. Oh, what I'm doing has this incredibly positive effect. And then they feel empowered to continue doing those things with their child. And part of the reason this is important, particularly in the Latino community, is that we hear anecdotally, but also from a lot of the research, that, you know, there's this gap, right, in terms of the number of words that certain children speak versus other children speak by the time they are school age, right? The number of words they hear, and then the number of words that they themselves speak. And so creating this opportunity for parents to gain this knowledge early on means that they're better equipped to ensure that their children are ready once they enter school, right? And so PIP's program is a support program for parents, and it's also an early learning program for children. Even though that wasn't necessarily the mission, it's one of the positive effects of the work we do.
No, I love that. That's great. You know, the cascading help that comes out of your organization. I know that you know, many groups have obviously had to pivot or change due to the pandemic, and then we've heard that you know, different challenges have come out of this new world that we're in now. Can you share with us maybe some of the struggles that parents have during the pandemic, due to the pandemic, that you weren't seeing before?
Sure. I mean, I think they run the gamut, right? There is the challenge that exists with Latinos being overrepresented in terms of the numbers of COVID infections and COVID deaths in our community, right? I think there is the challenge that exists with job loss and food insecurity and housing insecurity that, you know, trickles down because, you know, people were forced to engage with the workforce in a different way. And then there's the challenge that exists from not being able to access your systems of support, not being able to go physically into the school where your child used to go, and perhaps you had a relationship with a parent support specialist in the past, not being able to access some of those healthcare professionals in the same way, not being able to access your church community or your friends. And so all of these different challenges exist in creating more isolation for families who need support during this early period in their child's development. And so PIP's response in regards to the Latino community who we serve through part of our programming was to take a needs assessment. We are not like a resource provider per se of tangible resources, but we took a needs assessment of our family when we had to make that pivot from in-person groups at our community sites to pivoting to a different type of delivery. And first, our first question was, what do you need right now? And where we could, we connected those families to the resources in the community. So if it was diapers, then this is how you can get in contact with the diaper bank or with the clinics who are also like affiliates of the diaper banks. If it was food, then we disseminated information on a near daily basis. And we had this incredible text chain with all of the families who had participated in our groups to date, sharing that information so they could access the tangible resources they need. And then we also asked, do you want to continue with this group, with this community? And do you have the means to do so now? And so we couldn't pivot immediately into Zoom for a lot of our families because at the beginning of the pandemic, they weren't aware of what Zoom was. They may not have had the Wi-Fi capacity to do so. And so, you know, pretending that we could make that smooth transition wasn't helpful to anyone. And so we took a pause and we looked for a better means to communicate with families, and text work. And so what we did was we revamped our curriculum to provide that information through WhatsApp chains for targeted groups. And so we have small groups with 5 to 7 families in each, plus the facilitator. We send weekly text prompts and videos that are specific to the topic. So whether that topic is feeding, sleeping, development, early literacy, music, emotional changes and challenges, and perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. Those are just a handful of some of our topics. We distilled those into usable bits of information and then connected them with either video resources or online resources that they can click on and access, and then included a short weekly video call for 30 minutes where those families could connect in real time with one another. And what we saw is that even though we weren't bringing families together in person, families were still making tangible connections, right? These parents were feeling that sense of community, even if they weren't in a room together, much like, you know, I think we felt when we got together yesterday to get to know one another as panelists, right? You can create that sense of community even if you aren't, you know, physically in the same space. And that's what PIP is doing for a lot of these families. It's helping them connect, get that support that they need, connect to resources in the community, still have access to that tangible information that they can use as they, you know, are interacting with their children and establishing those really important relationships.
That's awesome. Can you take maybe 30, 60 seconds and give us just a quick illustration about somebody who's gone through PIP, a parent or some story that stuck with you?
Sure. So, I mean, I have a few, but I have 30 seconds. I will say it's always nice to see parents share songs that they create for their children and be bold enough to post them on the text chat, right? So take a video of themselves singing a song to their child. I don't feel particularly confident in my singing voice. I don't know that I would do it, but it's something that they're willing to put out there and share with one another. One of the more poignant stories that I would like to share is there were these 2 moms in one of our groups from the fall, Mirta, who had been through a group and then rejoined and wanted to be part of a second group. And she kind of brought another mom along with her, Lithi. And Mirta told us from the very beginning that she had lower literacy skills herself as the parent. She was an immigrant, relatively recent here, Spanish speaking only, and couldn't really read in Spanish either. And you know, she had formed this really strong bond with Lithi, and so they had both decided to do a group again. And at one point during their second group, she made mention of a pile of mail that she had at home that she couldn't read through herself. And because she wasn't physically going to places where maybe in the past she would have been able to ask someone to help her with that, she's like, I don't even know what I have here. And so despite COVID, despite the challenges, Lithi volunteered to go meet her somewhere, you know, with their masks on so that she could sort through it and explain to her what it was so that she would have that information and if it was important, something to act on. And I thought that was just really beautiful. Again, like the fact that these 2 individuals created this bond after knowing each other for 8 weeks over a text chain and short video calls, right? Because the power of that is really real. And when we feel validated in our experience and when we feel that others are there to support us, it really just provides a lot of positive change.
Thank you. That's incredible. And I appreciate you paring that down to a quick story. I know that we could spend this whole time just talking to, each of you individually. So I want to move on and talk to Dr. Fábregas. And from parenting to preparing for college to even attending college during the pandemic, there have been so many obstacles and unknowns for, our Latino community to overcome, and not necessarily the perfect course of action or one way to do it. As we prepare for Latinas, to help them go to college and to have better job opportunities and empower them, what have been some of the challenges your students have faced during the pandemic?
Okay, well, thank you, Stephanie. And first of all, I want to thank Hispanic Impact Fund for this great opportunity, for believing in our work, and for having us here. So the pandemic, as we all know, has been challenging for everyone. It's been difficult for everyone. And to illustrate, that challenge for our students and many others, I'll give you two examples. If we think about a student with resources during the pandemic, take a sixth grader who had to, go on lockdown, and their parents had the ability to work from home, and the student had to think about a home where there's a room for that student, and they have access to internet, and they have a laptop, and their mom or their dad or an adult in the home can take a time to step in and explain things as they navigate online learning. Just as someone who is in that situation as a parent, that is, it's time consuming, it requires a change in routine, but I have the resources to be able to provide that to my child. And my child has the resources of a space and access to technology and access to tutoring and connectivity to do that work. Now, if you think of, now let's talk about a student who is in, for instance, the sixth grade, and who lives in an apartment, in a one-bedroom apartment with 5 family members, and they have smaller kids in the home, and the parents cannot afford internet. They don't have up-to-date devices, or they might have one computer that works and has to be shared with other family members. And they might have to look after younger siblings during online instruction. And then they might have a parent who doesn't speak the language, doesn't speak English, only speaks Spanish, and they have a hard time even understanding how to navigate the system and help their children work. That example can be many of our students during the pandemic. So, those disparities that have existed for a long time only rose to the surface and became more apparent during this challenging time. And one of the things that we found out in interacting directly with our students was the huge digital divide that exists. And it's a very shocking reality when you think of a city like Austin, that is very tech oriented, and where we have so many great resources. The fact that right under our noses, we have a huge part of our population that doesn't have access to that technology or a tool as the internet, which is, it's as necessary as having a car, to get around nowadays. So that became even more apparent. The access to technology, to devices became more apparent, and then issues such as physical space, to do the work, and the need. I was just thinking of what Marcia mentioned, a few minutes ago, speaking about supporting the parents. If you really want to have an impact on the students' success, and breaking cycles of poverty and making it in today's world, you need to support the parents. So one of the things that became very apparent to us during this time was that our families, the moms that we serve, they needed more support than ever. And that support came in different ways. It could be connecting them with very specific services in the community. We also did a wellness assessment at the beginning of the pandemic, where we paused our services, leading groups of students or within the schools to individually call all of the families that we serve, like one-on-one, and to figure out, do they need help with housing, with healthcare, with food? Because even though those are not the services that we provide directly, we have a great team of students that have, coordinators that have social work degrees and have, you know, the ability to use more of their case management approach to understand those needs and then identify community needs and be able to connect the students and their families with those needs. So a great deal of time was spent for us trying to understand what those needs were and connecting families. And it gave us, you know, an insight into how much support parents need during this time, beyond the tangible things that they need to be connected with. Having somebody that can listen to you, can validate what you're going through. I mean, going through a pandemic is already isolating enough for everyone. You're at home, you're just going to work, you're, you know, keeping social distance. So feeling like the struggles and the overwhelming feeling of managing a family, of managing a home, and trying to support your children in their education, it's difficult. Having somebody acknowledge that and give you tips and you know, offer avenues to address those challenges becomes even more important during this time.
So you said y'all were doing a lot beyond what your, you know, initial mission is to serve, with housing and food and all those other insecurities. Can you tell me a little bit more about how your programming looks right now, so that you can still ensure that you're, you know, helping these young people reach their goals and, you know, still do the things that they intended to do with Con Mi Madre?
Yes, yes. So to go back and recap, and I just realized I didn't explain what we do so from the beginning. So we provide primarily Latina students and their moms resources and support that they need to navigate the educational pipeline from the 6th grade through post-secondary education and beyond. So what does that look like? Normally, we would be with the students who are in middle school and high school. We have cohorts and groups of students that we meet with on a monthly basis to implement a social emotional based curriculum where we're helping them navigate being a teenager, a preteen, a teenager, and from an early age, starting talking about college, about, you know, mapping their dreams, you know, bringing out, and I always say this, and I'm stealing this from somebody, and I can't remember from whom, but that your superpower is your, you know, it comes from your culture, from who you are. So based on that premise, we build on the students, you know, their sense of feeling empowered by who they are, by their struggles, by where they come from, by their families, rather than seeing all of those things as an extra, or in some cases as a handicap, which is how that's been communicated to many throughout, you know, their upbringing and in the social spaces that they inhabit. We try to dig deep and show them how that is where the source of the strength comes from, and that's what makes them unique and special. So we do that through these groups in the schools, through conferences. So there's a lot of in-person contact with the student and with the moms, where we do support groups and a number of events to build that community and help them map out their dreams of going to college and beyond. This year looked very different, so we had to quickly pivot and to doing online classes and events. And we tried different modalities. We tried PDF classes. We tried an online platform called Nearpod. We went through a pilot process, figuring out what worked with families and what they needed most. And then we moved to a model where we brought many of our groups together from different schools to create a larger group and a larger sense of connectivity, because we realized that families and students especially, they needed that. They needed to hear that there were others going through the same things. They needed to hear that there are others struggling, you know, in their academics, and to help each other, so that this if you will, the silver lining of this process has been creating a bigger sense of community with our students and access online to students that they normally and friends that they would have not made if it hadn't been for this opportunity. And then, you know, there was the part of connecting them with basic needs and conducting all of our out of school programming, our conferences. We have our college and career fairs. We normally have a college visit, you know, one that it's for a day during the fall and an overnight one in the spring, where the moms go with the daughters and they stay in a college campus. They get to sleep in the dorms. They get to see that. We couldn't do that this year, so we turned virtual. And the, you know, the participation and the degree of asking questions and hearing from people that had gone through this experience created this sense of excitement that even though our year looks very different, their goals, you know, are still aligned. They know where they're going. One of the big challenges is maintaining engagement this year. So we've had to increase our individual coaching services, spending more time one-on-one with students and their parents to guide them and orient them as to how do you plan to attain a college degree, you know, to go into college in an environment that's changing. I mean, it's not just the pandemic, but just in general, you know, socially, politically, we had a very different year to contend with. And for a student that's going through that process for the first time of applying for college, it can be very daunting. So that one-on-one guidance and support has become paramount in helping them out and you know, and encourage them to reach those goals.
Thank you. I appreciate you sharing all that. And as I'm hearing you speak, and I'm sure that everybody who's listening to the panelists, all the care in what you did, especially in this last year, because if there was any time living through a pandemic, you could throw up your hand and say, you know, this is too difficult. And so all of the things that you did in trial and error just continues to show the care that you have for the community and people that you work with. So I thank you for that and for sharing those stories. And continue our conversation about opportunity in higher education and job skills training. I would now bring Carl into the conversation. Many of us in Black and Brown communities have been told to shy away from our artistic passions to pursue more traditional professional training in science and technology because of the potential return on investment. Can you talk to us a little bit more about why it's important for E4 youth to provide the same professional job skills training for those who are interested in pursuing roles in the creative industry?
Sure. Thank you all for having me here. You know, creative youth, particularly creative youth of color, are ignored in our schools. If you think about the companies that are really driving our economy, they have figured out new innovative ways to do things that have been done before. Amazon dominates the marketplace. They start off selling books. And they figured out a creative way to sell those books was being able to do it online. So is Amazon, what is it? Is it a creative company? I would say that it is. Is Netflix a technology company or is it a creative company? So the creativity is the core of what drives our economy, what drives innovation. And our creative youth of color, whereas a lot of students in more affluent communities get access to private lessons, they get access to clubs, they get those artistic outlets and they're encouraged to do those things. Whereas we're trying to tell our students, you just need to stick to the basics. And what happens is that they don't feel seen. And that is a natural source of disenfranchisement for these students. And it has a deleterious effect over time. And I witnessed it when I was at a school. They had back-to-back, it was a middle school, they had back-to-back honor roll ceremonies. And first it was the sixth graders, and 2/3 of the 6th grade was on the stage to be recognized for being on honor roll. And then then they did the 7th graders. And then it was like, not even half were on the stage. And then 8th grade, there was like 12 or 15 kids on the stage. These are the same kids. And so what I say is that if you really want to have students that are prepared for the jobs of the future, and frankly, we don't really know what those jobs are, they have to be creative thinkers. And we also have to give them, and I see this over and over again with students that come to me that are in college, and they have all of these credentials or all these performative credentials, but they're really emotionally in a mess because they're just trying to do what they think people want them to do. And they're not given that opportunity to really explore who they are, what is their identity. And so it's absolutely fundamental and essential that students are given that opportunity. And once they start to do that, it's much easier for them to start to hone in and figure out, well, what is it that I actually want to do? And technology is important. And I'll even talk about my story. I have a music degree, and most of my career has been made in technology and in education. But had I not been indulged, I would have never really found those opportunities. And I see that that's happening over and over and over for our students. And so we really want to provide that outlet for them. And they are the ones, they are the creative thinkers that are going to determine what our future is going to look like. Nobody's saying to Jeff Bezos, the CEO of Amazon, that, hey, Jeff, you need to code. You know, Steve Jobs wasn't coding, right? And so it's really about creative thinking. And we've kind of sold our students a false bill of goods in terms of what it really means to be successful and what is really going to help them advance in the long run.
I would love to hear a story about one of the youth who's gone through the program. Yeah, just a little bit more about how it affected them.
Sure. I'll talk about a young man, Bryson. Bryson, I met him in the hallway at LBJ High School. He was just about to graduate, had a friend, a mentor that said, hey, Bryson likes to draw. And so I introduced Bryson to our program, and I introduced him to one of the partners at an advertising agency who happened to be on our board of directors. And so his first job or first internship as an 18-year-old was at an ad agency. And he would, every day, he would meet with one of the executive creative directors, and the director would give him a list of questions, and he'd send him to a different department in the agency. And he'd have to find out basically what does this department do and then report back on that. Fast forward 5 years later, he has 5 paid internships at different agencies and startups. And I remember him telling me at one point that the $15 an hour that he was making at these 2 internships had more than doubled his household income. Okay. And he's a creative. He actually now he has an advertising degree. He went to portfolio school. And now he's hired full-time as the lead creative at a technology company. And I guess that's ultimately what I'm saying is that technology is no good without creativity, right? And Bryson figured out that there was a place for him, that his skills, the things that he was interested in, the things that he was passionate about, were really going to take him somewhere. So, and I think we are going to hear from Bryson for many, many years to come. He's maybe 23, 24 years old. He just had some animation that he did that was featured in a Spotify commercial. He's a star, and I can walk into any high school in Austin and find you 20 Brysons in one day.
I love that. I love that, you know, what I'm hearing is you're helping them with that social capital, because I find that that's what a lot of our kiddos don't have, those connections that we can help them make. In talking about those connections and you know, you mentioned some of those businesses, Amazon and things like that. Can you tell us a little bit about how you're leveraging some of the organizations that we have in Austin for training and long-term success of your student trainees?
Sure. So we established what we now call the Creative Leadership Academy, and that's for college-age youth of color. And you know, I'd say 2/3 of our students are Latinx or Hispanic origin. And we essentially say, look, we will pay you $250 a semester just to get your act together. If they spend 20 hours a month working with us, doing personal swaps, being able to work directly with professionals at companies, then we will give them a $250 stipend. We hire them directly, and we also have our partners hire them. This semester, we're going to be working with Verizon Media, Frog Design, Wunderman Thompson, the Butler Brothers. All of them are going to be leading industry studios where members of our Leadership Academy are able to opt in to a studio and work directly with these professionals that are in these fields for the course of a semester. And what's happening with that is that these students are being snapped up by these companies. And we have students on a continuum, students that know exactly what they want to do and students that are just starting to explore. So we've really tried to focus on building a model where the companies also see that these are things of value. We had a company, Wunderman Thompson, they came to us because they had hired a guy that was an intern that had been a part of our program, and they wanted to hire him full time, but they couldn't because another company that was one of our partners had already built up a long-term relationship with him. And so there was nothing that they could do to really be able to get him back. And so they started coming to us and saying, look, we want to find more people like that young person. And so we've we've developed a way to really get these companies that are in technology, they're in advertising, in media, production and entertainment, to really get them to see that it's not just a warm and fuzzy feeling that we're offering to them, but something that's really going to help them increase their bottom line and bring new and innovative thought to what they're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate you sharing that, Carl. And, you know, I'd love to take it back and ask y'all all to share a little bit with me about your hopes for the future. If you can all just take a minute. And as we start the new year, what are you most excited for your organization? What's next? And Maria, let's start with you, since we'll go back to the beginning.
Sure. And I think, yeah, we are ripe in that moment of getting to kind of dream and vision again. And I think so much of what Carl just shared really resonated with me, because oftentimes when we think about children with disabilities and people with disabilities, we think about, you know, meeting their needs short term and making sure that they have what they need for this moment. But one of the things that we're doing at VELA now is we're adding courses to really look at visioning for the future. So once you have stability in terms of diagnosis, understanding what that means, understanding how to get the most out of school and all of the wraparound services while your child is in this age, right? What's next, and how do you start planning for that now? So we just launched, thanks to Hispanic Impact Fund, we launched a curso de transición a la edad adulta, so transitioning into adulthood, right? And helping parents not just know the resources and know the agencies and connect the dots, but more importantly, vision with and for their child, so that we're not just thinking of this scarcity mindset of, well, this is the least that they could do, but what is the most that we can dream? And I think things like creativity, right? We're not just thinking of these are the jobs that people with disabilities could do, which is ridiculous because they're people, right? So we're super excited about this next part of our lifeline of services, of really looking at planting those seeds and beginning those bold conversations with families about what's next and how to get ready and excited and plan for that with plenty of time for success. So that's one thing we're super excited about, and the ripple effects of that. And then also just looking at how do we move away from, again, as I mentioned earlier, this idea of repairing and more building. So we are in this phase now of looking at who can be our key healthcare and educational partners, where we can embed our services and our programming. So we don't just get connected with a family once they're having a hard time, but we are the beginning for them so that they can, build and shape and vision for the brightest future for their family.
Thank you. And Marcia, what about PIP? What's next? What are you excited about?
Sure. Well, I will say that if there is a silver lining to all of COVID-19, is that as an organization, we were forced to be innovative and pretty nimble in how we delivered our services and had families connect. And so now that we're utilizing virtual means to do so, it gives our small organization greater capacity to have further reach, right? Because before, when we were bringing families together in person, transportation was an issue, geography was an issue, finding space to host our groups could be an issue. But now those challenges are eliminated, at least for the time being, and we're able to reach families who live in Hayes County who maybe would not have been able to travel up into a South Austin group, out from Bastrop and some of the more rural areas in the surrounding Austin community. And so that is really exciting because we're able to start forming relationships with partners in those locations. And then maybe when it is safe to return to in-person gatherings, we have already established this groundwork to meet the needs of the community in those locations. And so that's something that we're really looking forward to. We've already started some of that groundwork, but really expanding upon that throughout the rest of the year.
Awesome, thank you, appreciate that. And Dr. Fábregas, what about you? What are you excited about? What's in the future for
Yes, well, I'll definitely piggyback on that silver lining of having access to more people. And one of the things that I'm really excited about, and we've tried it out this year already, is exposing our students, our families to people beyond our state lines, beyond our country lines. We've had a lot of events, I think, where we brought international figures, where we brought speakers from other parts of the country to expand not just the connection of the students, but their network and open new doors for them. One of the things that I'm very excited about as well is expanding the support that we offer parents, which has most of the time been focused, over the years on helping them help their students. And we've been doing that for a long time, but going beyond that and supporting the moms of our students with instruction to improve, their ability to enter the job market with better paying jobs. So with English language, with computer access, with, navigating different platforms of the internet. And last but not least, because there's many, but one of the things that I'm the most excited about, I know I'm excited about it all, is how we use this year and will continue to take the opportunity to work with other organizations and do more coalition building. So throughout 2020, MADRE worked closely with E4 Youth, so with Carl, who's here, and with Latinitas as well, to bring together our success in having impact on the lives of the students, being able to map that out, to inform the work of others, but also to see ourselves as a pipeline of services where the students are not just going to one particular organization for one need, but we can work together to ensure that nobody falls through the cracks, that nobody's left outside, so that there is truly a community, like think about it as a big net that's, you know, supporting all of our students in all of their different needs. So I'm very excited to continue that process of building that, that coalition, because none of us can be successful and have, you know, far-reaching impact alone. We need our community.
Thank you. And the community definitely needs all of you. Like you said, there's usually not a person who just has one sort of need or one program that they can benefit from. There's always opportunity for collaboration and sharing. And so, Carl, what about you? What are y'all looking to the future for? What are you excited about?
Well, I definitely have to piggyback on what Johanna was talking about with the coalition that we're developing. I'm really excited about that. We're looking at, we've been surveying across all of our organizations about what are their needs regarding digital equity. E for Youth, we are actually able to hire our college age students that are then going and supporting our sister organizations that are working with kids ages 6 all the way through to 24, and help them integrate curriculum that focuses on integrating digital and cultural literacy through storytelling, community storytelling. And that idea of really developing a tangible pipeline and de-siloing our approach, where we have a pipeline of 10,000 plus students ages 6 to 24 across Central Texas that know about each other, that know the actual cultural history of their collective neighborhoods and their city. And not only that, they also have these digital literacy skills and digital equity, digital divides that are being bridged. And so we believe that if we start to do that, then we're going to accelerate the growth of all of our students across the ecosystem. You know, the need is so great. No one organization is going to be able to answer the level of need that is out there. And any one of our students, you know, we can talk about them as if they're just, hey, we just made that kid successful, but we know that there's lots of people that are all playing a role in helping these students achieve success. So the thing I'm most excited about is to be able to connect with folks like Call Me Madre and Latinitas, Creative Action, and I extend this invitation to the other organizations that are here. Let's talk. Let's figure out what can we do? How do we start to be coordinated? I want to cultivate a mindset of abundance, not scarcity. And how can we really make an impact that's going to be a revolutionary, a fundamental change in the status quo in Central Texas?
I appreciate your boldness, because we need that, right? Like sometimes, you know, people are like, you've done enough. We're good. No, we're not. We need to keep stepping out there and be bold and be brave. And I love hearing about that abundance. So we're definitely going to share in the chat a link so that you can learn more about our other grantees as well. I want to invite Esteban to join me, because I think we may have a few questions from the audience. I put a few in as we were going, but I want to make sure that I didn't miss any.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much. I mean, I am just in awe, and I constantly am in awe. If I could ask Lucy real quick, if you can drop the HIF blog post in the chat. You know, I think there's so much to do, and I'd like to echo Stephanie's call for boldness. And, you know, I think, you know, we in a time when there was so much unknown, right? I think the Hispanic Impact Fund, we tried to say, you know what, we are just going to try to do what we know we can do and try to, be bold as well and say, we are going to band together and ensure that this collective can provide the capital and also just cut the strings and take away all the red tape. And so I want to really, again, give kudos to Monica Munoz Andri and Stephanie Bazan for leading an amazing effort to get out these dollars. I know so much of this unrestricted funding was able to be given directly to families, right? To be able to pay for, food assistance and utility assistance this year. And so, thank you again for all of your service. I had a personal question that I know came up before we kind of move on with the rest of the program. Maria, I know kind of at the intersection of kind of health and education that you work in, you must be getting a lot of questions in this moment about the vaccine and its rollout. What are you hearing from families, and how do you answer the questions that they have at the moment, and where do you point them during this time? Because we know that when we work as leaders in the community and when we work with families, right, they come to us for any issues that they have, and we become their families, right? Like you as a leader in the community become part of the family. And so what are you hearing? What do you tell them? And where have you been directing them currently? And how can we maybe help as part of this process?
Thank you. Yes, I think, all of us to some degree, of course, are caught in a lot of confusion and unknown about this. But as you mentioned, for the families that we get to partner with, it's especially confusing because they're at this intersection of being maybe at additional risk because of a disability in the home, because of work environments and having to work in those work environments. And then really minimal healthcare access for the adult, right? A lot of our families are mixed status. So maybe child has access to insurance and parent doesn't. And so there's a lot of those misconceptions carrying over about what can I and can I not access then as an adult. Additionally, what we're seeing the most is that the challenge here is really layered, right? We think of it as, oh, it's because maybe there's confusion about lack of vaccines or where it is that I can access this. But really what we're finding, unfortunately, is that it comes back to the same systemic barriers that some of us have mentioned here today. That to potentially get on, right, APH's list, or maybe a list through whoever my clinic is, I need to log into an account, right? So I need to know how to use my email, not just that I have an email, but I know how to check my email. And I know how to use that 100% on my phone, right? We think of like so much stuff that's like, these websites are clunky and they're hard on a laptop, but all of our families are doing this via phone. And so the biggest challenges, again, have been digital inequity to access really a health need. The other, which has been really large, is a lot of our families are very hesitant to share their information to get on lists because it requires sharing it with a government entity, a clinic potentially, or even City of Austin. And they are still have a huge ripple effect of the trauma that's left over from the previous administration. And so there is a lot of hesitancy around even becoming visible again, so that I can potentially access this vaccine sooner. So for us, it comes back to how we started: knowledge, right? Demystifying and getting to kind of unravel the truths and untruths about what truly is there, and sharing the information really plainly and simply. We're so bad about that as a community. We think more is more, more is more. And here's 800 websites and 800 flyers. But what we're doing is sifting and culling through all of the information to get to, let's test all of the phone numbers that are being shared with families and then share 5 bullet points, right? So we're not sharing 3-page notices. We're just distilling to the basic information. And then what we're doing is we're having virtual conversations in our support groups and our courses that start next week. We now have a whole section around COVID, because it's not just about access to vaccines, but what are the truths about even once you do receive a vaccine, how you need to maintain what you're doing, right? And so for us, it's really been about coming back to breaking those digital inequities, addressing those, making sure that families can access, even beginning to be visible, and feeling comfortable being visible now with things that feel very public. And then making sure once they have it, that we're saying, spread it, right? Tell everybody about it. And of course, our families are resilient and they are hustlers. They know how to do this. So as soon as they have something that they're like, I know what this means, then it's on every WhatsApp group you can imagine. And it doesn't just rely on us to be sharing and really giving that information. But I think coming back to, what we've been talking about here is, unfortunately, as organizations, we often get charged with things that are in our area of expertise, and then we try and all solve them individually. So I think this is such a key moment of coalition building and saying, who has the really good, video in Spanish that we can share with families, or do we create it? But let's not reduplicate services. Let's not reduplicate efforts, and really work together to say, here's a really good way of sharing, connecting, and then let's all disseminate for the benefit of our community.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much for that. And thank you, everyone. I know I just want to reiterate that this has been a very hard time. The work that you have done has often gone, I know it's gone kind of underappreciated. And I want to take the space to just say thank you, because we would have not been able to weather this storm as a community if it had not been for your bold leadership and for, I know, the countless hours of work. So thank you from the bottom of our hearts. And I know it's the money that we are able to provide and grant support is not enough. And I wish that our coffers were even more filled, so that we could provide even more organizations like yours and the 8 others, right, that make up the 12 that we were able to fund this year, to provide all the amazing organizations that exist within our Central Texas communities, so that we could really close this racial wealth divide in an instant. But unfortunately, it's going to take a while. And I know we are going to have a call to action kind of at the end of this, but I just really truly wanted to say thank you to everyone. And one other quick thank you. It takes a village, so I want to give a quick shout out again to Stephanie, to Yvette, to Monica, and to Linda, who you'll hear from in a moment. We have an amazing team. Oh, also to Lucy Weberline, and also to Erica Renstrom behind the scenes, foundation staff. It is a team effort to be able to provide this programming to you today, and we are a very close-knit team who takes pride in the amazing programming that we're able to do. So thanks to all of you for being here with us today on this Wednesday morning / afternoon. So I'm going to hand things back over to Stephanie to get us towards the finish line. But thank you again.
Sounds great. Thank you, Esteban. And as he mentioned, we're getting close to the end of time. So I just want to thank our dynamic panelists once again. Thanks so much for taking the time to be here with us today and share a little bit about your story. We're really honored to be part of the successes and all the great strides that you're making in our community. So thank you so much. As everyone said, and I wish you could hear all of our shouts and hoorays for you. Now it is my great pleasure to introduce a good friend, Linda Medina Lopez. She is the founder of both the Young Hispanic Professional Association of Austin and El Paso and Austin Network. She's also recently been named the Hispanic Impact Fund's 2021 Chair for Somos Austin. So please help me welcome Linda.
Thank you, Stephanie, for that kind introduction. And thank you to our amazing panelists for sharing the wonderful work that you do day in and day out for our Latino families in Central Texas. As part of the Hispanic Impact Fund, I know that my investment goes further along when I do it in a collective effort. As Stephanie mentioned, I have been recently named the 2021 Somos Austin Chair. Last year, over $250,000 were raised under the leadership of Sandy Alcala. And this year we are charged with raising $345,000, helping us reach the $1 million grant mark to give out back to our community, back to wonderful organizations like the ones you just saw today. As you know, we are currently working very closely with health officials and understanding what we can do to take action against COVID-19. And so we are monitoring that so that if we can have an in-person event this fall, we will. However, if we're not able to, we will move into the digital space. And so with that said, the fundraising initiative has just begun, and we will begin to ask corporations and individuals and businesses for investments, right? And they begin at the $600 level and up. Benefits include voting for the grant making process, invitations to all events, opportunities to also participate in leadership committees and the grants committees, and so on. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Esteban Delgado or myself. Our emails are going to be shared with you on the screen. You can also visit the Austin Community Foundation website, or you can also visit somosaustin.org. Thank you all so very much for joining us this morning, and we hope to see you soon.